My name is Eric Vandenberg. I'm the Deputy Director of the Commission's Office of Electrical Reliability. Thank you for being here today and sticking with us as we are in the home stretch. The good news is we have saved the best for last. So I'll be moderating this panel, and our next discussion will focus on perspectives from regional, state, and local regulatory entities. We'll introduce each panelist and give them an opportunity to provide opening remarks. I am not quite as strict as my boss, David Ortiz, so let's say approximately 2 to 3 minutes. And so let me introduce our esteemed panel here. First, we have Commissioner Julie Fedorchak with the North Dakota Public Service Commission. Second, we have Miles Keogh, Executive Director of the National Association of Clean Air Agencies. We also have Mary Throne, Chairman of the Wyoming Public Service Commission, here on behalf of the Western Interconnection Regional Advisory Body, also known as WIRAB. Will Toor, Executive Director of the Colorado Energy Office. And then Judge Jehmal Hudson, Commissioner, Virginia State Service Commission. Thank you for all being with us today. Mr. Chairman, unless you had anything else, we could move into opening statements for our panelists. All right,
please proceed.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much. Commissioner Danley and Christie and all of the other veterans in the room, thank you for your service as we come upon Veterans Day. I wanted to acknowledge you. If you would indulge me, I want to make a couple comments and observations from this morning's discussion on reliability. Just a few brief ones. First of all, sometimes in this job, you get so deep into the weeds with things, it helps to step back sometimes and look at things from a bigger picture. So I'm just struck when we're talking about these reliability challenges that in a nation that is so blessed with an abundant array of affordable, reliable energy resources like America is, it really doesn't seem plausible that we should ever fall short. Like, yes, we have storms, yes, there's power outages, that's gonna happen, but not having enough should never happen, ever. So we have to, that is a crisis in leadership that all of us face. I include myself as a state regulator, and we have to fix that. The fact that 2/3 of the nation is facing a reality where we might not have enough, that just can't be. So, Commissioner Clements, I really appreciate your focus on solutions. Yes, there are solutions. We spent the morning hearing about the pace of new building, the pace of retirements, the pace of adapting the decades-old planning principles, the pace of developing new technologies to replace existing baseload resources, the pace of harmonizing the gas electric industries. All of those things, we have our hands full. And I've spent most of my time with RTOs and MISO, and yeah, there are solutions, but the one thing we need more than anything else is patience, because this stuff is complicated and it's going to take some time. So Jim Robb this morning, I want to talk about the EPA rules a little bit. Jim Robb this morning said the country hasn't proven its ability to build new infrastructure, and we need to fix that, and we need to retain what we have. I agree with him, and I think the EPA rules definitely pose a big challenge to the second part of that in terms of retaining what we have. There might not be a huge impact immediately on the retirement decisions, but it is definitely a chilling effect on anybody looking to invest in any new fossil fuel resources when there's that many question marks out there about what the regulatory climate might look like. Not in the long term, we're talking 5 years. So that's a big issue there. These rules come on top of the already pretty stringent rules on coal. We got to take all of them into consideration at once. The existing rules impact 110 gigawatts of fossil fuel resources in our nation. 110 gigawatts, that's more than the entire MISO peak demand during Storm Uri. 110 gigawatts is impacted by the existing rules, not the greenhouse gas rule. So that has a serious effect. We have to look at all of these rules in combination. In terms of the best system emission reduction analysis, I don't think the EPA's analysis reflects reality. You heard the folks talk eloquently about that earlier, so I won't go on. But I do believe, if you were to have to comply with CCS by 2030, you'd have to start planning now. We have 2 projects in our state, North Dakota, and we have storage right there, and they will be lucky to have those projects up and running and proven by 2030. So that's a very tight timeline. And then in terms of the cost, my final issue. When I read some of the EPA documents when they were releasing the rule, one thing really struck me. A quote, they said, the power sector has a broad set of tools to deploy clean, affordable energy, take advantage of ready-to-go advanced pollution technology, create and retain good-paying jobs, and reduce energy costs for families and businesses. Now, you can debate many of the things in that quote, but to suggest that this rule or the energy transition as a whole is going to reduce costs, energy costs for Americans, that's just irresponsible. That is not what we're looking at. And we can't keep promising that to people. As an economic regulator who's elected, I go to the grocery store and I hear from people when I'm picking out apples about their energy costs rising. People notice this. It is not going to be cheaper for anyone. And reducing costs suggests that it is. So we have to be honest with the folks about what we're facing here, and we have to be real in terms of the timelines. And with that, I'll close and look forward to your questions later.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Keogh.
Friends, thank you so much. Chairman Phillips, Commissioner Christie, it's such a delight to be back with my neighborhood people. I've really missed you guys. Commissioner Danley, Commissioner Clements, thank you so much for having me, and to the FERC staff for making today possible. I'm Miles Keogh. I get the corner office at the National Association of Clean Air Agencies, which is like NARUC, but it's for the 157 state and local and territorial agencies that implement and enforce the Clean Air Act. I just want to note the views that I'm expressing today are my own, and they shouldn't be taken to reflect the views of all the NACA member agencies. So EPA sets a target through its BSER process, but Section 111 of the Clean Air Act vests our member agencies with the responsibility to develop the state plans under EPA's rule. I know everyone in this room agrees that the power sector's transition away from contributing to the climate crisis must be both swift and skillful. While the Clean Air Act has been a runaway success story, the climate crisis has the potential to reverse some of these gains. 2023 is already shaping up to be the hottest year in 125,000 years. Longer, hotter ozone seasons and wildfires imperil our ability to attain and maintain the national ambient air quality standards. And 1 in 3 Americans are already living in areas that don't meet those standards for healthy clean air. So this is work that's not yet finished. However, this proposed EPA regulation is not the only or even the main driver of the energy transition, which we've been talking about at length today. There's data from several states, and I won't steal Colorado's thunder here, that showed that the least cost pathways forward are delivering deep decarbonization. NACA filed consensus comments from our 157 clean air agencies on EPA's proposal in August 2023. NACA recommended that states be given clear signals in a final rule for the flexibilities in our state plans that would address the unknowns of implementation. We called for 3 broad types of flexibilities. First, presumptively approvable approach flexibilities, things like trading and averaging, mass and rate-based trading, and where necessary, the kind of enforcement discretion that goes beyond just the rule-off provisions that are described in the rule. Second, except in as much as they might reduce the protectiveness of the emission reduction pathway of the rule. We're environmental regulators, so what we care about is the emission reductions pathway and maintaining the stringency and consistency of it. Second, planning flexibilities that allow state plans to change and utility plans to change without undue regulatory burdens. Third, compliance pathway flexibilities, such as extending the compliance pathways offered to some technologies for them to be fuel neutral so that they avoid unintended consequences. We also sought sufficient time and resources in order to do the job, especially to enable meaningful engagement with the most vulnerable communities. As I loved hearing this morning, as we change the mindset in the power sector family from thinking strictly about capacity to thinking about energy adequacy, states will need your help to ensure that our progress in that regard does not undermine the protectiveness and effectiveness of the emission reductions that we need to address the climate crisis. I think the provisions and flexibilities that NACA has called for with EPA in our comments on the rule allow for state plans that meet the moment, But I think we need to really keep talking together so that we can achieve the reliability goals that we must have, and we can also achieve the emission reductions that are absolutely imperative. Thank you for this opportunity to talk today, and I'm looking forward to a continued conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Keogh. Chairman Thrum?
Thank you. Ooh. I have a little bit of a cold, so I'm punting questions to my fellow panelists. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners, FERC staff. As you already know, I am here on behalf of WYRAB, not the state of Wyoming, and I won't say the full name of WYRAB again. It's easier than Krebsy, Commissioner Christie, I think. But I'm going to speak more generally about what's happening in the West and our concerns about reliability, and just focus on three key and I hope quick messages. First, the policy and regulations impacting reliability. NERC has identified energy policy, as you know, as a significant risk in its 2023 reliability risk priorities. Proposed regulations such as EPA's greenhouse gas standards for fossil fuel-fired electric generating units can have a profound impact on the energy landscape. As states and federal policies pursue decarbonization goals, it is crucial to assess their effects on grid reliability before adoption. And I think that's the discussion we're having here today. To understand the implications of policy and regulatory changes in the Western interconnection, we continue to need long-term studies conducted transparently and independently. The Western Electricity Coordinating Council, and there are folks here from that entity, is well suited for this role, ensuring credibility and trust in their findings. These studies should assess potential challenges, vulnerabilities, and opportunities arising from policy changes and involving all stakeholders, including regulators, utilities, grid operators, and the public. Continuous monitoring of policy effects on grid reliability is vital, and regulatory authorities should engage with sister agencies to assess proposed policy impacts proactively. Educating public officials, including elected officials, about grid reliability, complexities, and policy implications is essential. And I might add, challenging. I'm going off script here, but it's a challenge for us in Wyoming. We have legislators who are concerned and ask a lot of questions, but my answer to them is, well, it's complicated. They say to me, well, Mary, we don't want to hear that, So it's a challenge to explain the complexities in ways that are meaningful to those who have to make the public policy. So WYRAB collaborates with WEC to provide data that informs regulators and policymakers about potential reliability impacts of energy policymaking. Also in the West, we have a robust discussion, I think as all of you know, on resource adequacy programs and expanding markets. Traditionally, Western electric utilities relied on bilateral wholesale electricity markets for capacity and energy exchange to leverage resource diversity. However, with coal unit retirements and increased electricity demand, the surplus capacity is diminished, making resource trading more complex. And so we have two solutions emerging in the West. The Western Power Pool is implementing the Western Resource Adequacy Program, aiming to support capacity and energy exchange across the West. California, always on its own, has its own resource adequacy program, and we're hoping to optimize capacity and energy exchange to promote cost-effective power supply. Organized markets are expanding in the Western Interconnection with real-time and day-ahead markets in development. These reforms, many believe, can enhance reliability and improve situational awareness. We've had WEC studies that suggest expanding real-time markets into the day-ahead timeframe could reduce load variability and improve the coordinated commitment of generating resources. But also, as all of you know, we have a wide variety of viewpoints in and among the Western states as to markets and the value of markets. Finally, you've had a lot of discussion today about transmission optimization. The reliability of the Western Interconnection's grid depends on optimizing and expanding its transmission infrastructure, especially with changing policies impacting the resource mix. And we continue to focus on regional collaboration and coordination, the way the West likes to do it, which means no one can tell us what we are supposed to do. But we continue to collaborate. Questions remain about how new transmission lines should be developed, who should provide the analysis for West-wide needs, and the independence of regional transmission planning entities. Transparency and unbiased information are lacking, which is why YRAB encourages FERC to support a Western Interconnection-wide transmission study that goes beyond traditional planning requirements. This study can provide insights into joint interregional transmission planning needs. In conclusion, addressing reliability risks in the Western Interconnection is, I'm going to use this word, complex, and requires regional coordination. Long-term studies, resource adequacy, expanding markets, and transmission optimization are vital components of ensuring a reliable and resilient energy infrastructure in the face of evolving policies and regulations. But we must engage proactively to safeguard grid reliability and promote a sustainable energy future. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chair Throne. Mr. Toor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Will Toor, and I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Energy Office. It's great to be able to be here with you today. I'd like to share our state's perspective on the trajectory of power generation in Colorado, how the EPA's proposed rule is consistent with that trajectory, and considerations that will be important to both affordability and reliability as the EPA finalizes the rule. Colorado is well on its way towards deep decarbonization of our electric system. What has enabled this transition is the dramatic decline in the cost of wind and solar and the increasing skill of our utilities in effectively integrating renewables. We have a strong working partnership with our utilities focused on the three pillars of affordability, reliability, and emission reductions. Under adopted electric resource plans, the last coal plant in the state will retire by the end of 2030, and GHG emissions will decline 84 to 87% below 2005 levels. Our office recently contracted for modeling performed by Ascend Analytics of pathways to 2040. We asked them to model the lowest cost mix of resources needed to reliably meet projected 2040 load under a high electrification scenario. In that lowest cost scenario, our grid achieves 98.5% emission reduction by 2040, adding significant amounts of wind, solar, and batteries, while retaining a gas generation fleet approximately the same size as today. By 2040, wind, solar, and batteries provide the vast majority of electricity, while the gas units play a very important reliability role, but provide less than 2% of generation. By 2032, only one gas unit is projected to approach a 20% capacity factor. And by 2038, no unit is projected to have a capacity factor over 11%. Simply by minimizing costs to consumers, we will likely meet EPA's requirements, since all coal plants in the state will be retired, and we're projecting that no gas plant will have a capacity factor that triggers the EPA requirements for hydrogen or CCS. We do believe that it will be important, as the EPA finalizes the rules, to ensure maximum flexibility for states to comply in the most cost-effective manner. We urge EPA to maximize the ability of states to use trading, mass or rate-based averaging, and other approaches. This should include an ability for states to recognizing the changing use of existing gas plants over time. In order to minimize any potential impact on reliability, EPA should consider rules for state plans that allow demonstration with rule requirements based on actual operating information rather than strict permit restrictions, allow use of modeling data in the initial state plan development, along with ongoing reporting of operating data to ensure that emissions are on track to meet requirements, and to consider allowing multi-year averages for demonstration of compliance as a way to account for unexpected system reliability conditions in any one year. We believe that the most important steps that FERC can take to assure reliability in the context of the EPA rules are really to continue to take actions to speed up interconnection, improve long-term transmission planning, and support the build-out of interregional transmission. One thing that was clear in our planning efforts was that one of the limitations that we face is the ability to participate in large-scale power exchanges either to the east or to the west due to transmission constraints. And with that, again, thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Toor. Judge Hudson.
Thank you, everyone. And before I begin, I'd like to personally thank Chairman Phillips and the commissioners for having me here today. I'm Jehmal Hudson, Chairman of the Virginia State Corporation Commission. The Virginia State Corporation Commission is an independent economic regulator that protects the public interest. As many of you know, before I was elected to the commission, I spent 10 years here at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, managing policy issues, including working with Congress as FERC's Director of Government Affairs. I continue to feel a strong commitment to public service, and I'm sincerely grateful to be in my current position, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. State commissions must ensure that the public has access to reliable and affordable service. And I can say at a very high level that the commission continues to implement our authority under the statute in a manner that implements the General Assembly's intent and that protects consumers who expect reliable and affordable service. I work very hard to follow the statutes enacted by the General Assembly, and where given discretion, I strive to apply the law and regulations to balance the interests between the consumers and the utilities when it comes to the economic concerns of the Commonwealth. Now, in Virginia, energy policy is set by the state legislature, and our role at the Commission is to implement that energy policy that has been established by the Virginia General Assembly. For example, the Commission continues to implement the requirements of the Virginia Clean Economy Act while best protecting consumers who expect reliable and affordable service. The Virginia Clean Economy Act, which our legislature enacted in 2020, sets out various requirements relative to the energy transition in Virginia that mainly applies to our two largest investor-owned utilities. The overall goal of the VCEA is to reduce Virginia's carbon emissions to zero by 2045. The utilities, however, may petition the Commission for relief from these requirements if they're concerned that retiring a carbon-emitting facility on the basis that the requirements would threaten the reliability or security of electric service to customers. The Virginia State Corporation Commission also regularly prepares legislative studies and reports as directed by statute. In its 2023 session, our state legislature passed a law requiring the Commission to include in one of our annual reports any information concerning the reliability impacts of generation unit additions and retirement determinations by jurisdictional utilities. But with all that being said, the most important consideration of all is the consumer. Consumers expect reliable and affordable service, and their expectations are growing as their dependency grows. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Hudson. With that, we've reached the Q&A portion. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you to all the panelists, regulators, and commissioners, policymakers. You know, it's interesting. I always look forward to this panel. It is the most refreshing conversation because it's familiar. You know, and then Commissioner, you make a great point. I remember well the spirited conversations I've had in grocery stores across the District of Columbia with folks. They know you, and you guys are closest to the ground with the activity that we're doing. So what happens here impacts you directly. And so one of the things I want to talk about is the impact of this rule. What you think about it? Do you think it will have a reliability impact? And in particular, I'll start with you, Mr. Keogh. You raised the idea of lots of concerns, timing, reliability concerns. You also talked about a reliability exemption, and you argued against a reliability exemption. And so I would like to hear from you. Why do you argue against it? And then I'd like to expand that to the rest of the panel to see if you have any comments on whether or not a reliability exemption is a good idea.
All right, thank you so much for that question. What a great question. Let me start by saying NACA did not argue against a reliability exemption. We talked about within our 157 agency Thanksgiving meal over this, whether we should explicitly call for one. And we chose not to explicitly call for one for a number of reasons. One is there are already a number of flexibility mechanisms that ensure reliability on the books. And second, there are a number of flexibility mechanisms that we did call for that are, and that should enable states to develop plans that advance their needs. And third, because reliability is not our swim lane, it's your swim lane. So for us to explicitly call for one feels like us getting out of our wagon and getting into yours. So there's a difference between calling for one and calling against one and simply staying out of it, and that's actually what NACA did in that space. I will say there are the concerns that Commissioners Danley and Christie raised today are things that we're worried about too. The things that the folks from the previous panel that they raised about losing resources, those are things that the air regulators are worried about as well. Commissioner Fedorchak nailed it when she said nobody should be in a situation of want in a country with so much. But we're also trying to solve a bunch of different problems at once. And I don't think the EPA rule is the main thing that's forcing us into a situation of want. And we need to work together so that y'all can provide those forming air policies with what we need to know so that we can skillfully implement those so that we don't inadvertently, the last thing we want to do, create reliability challenges. And so we're going to need to keep talking.
Thank you. Chairman Hudson.
Thank you, Chairman. The question that you're asking is a very tough one, and like most things, it depends. It may depend on what compliance pathways utilities may choose to follow. It may depend on retiring a unit ahead of schedule or incurring retrofit costs to comply with new standards. It may depend on the deployment of new generation facilities to replace retiring units. Of course, and there's been talk about this earlier about integrating new resources onto the grid and the challenges there. It may depend on newer technologies, as mentioned, such as carbon capture sequestration and hydrogen, which is referenced to the rule. But I think the impact of reliability will depend on the technology that is needed to support the large amounts of inverter-based generation that's going to go onto the grid. I think also maintaining reliability may depend on transmission owners and the ability to build or deploy substantial amounts of transmission to move power over long distances. But I will say that these issues and concerns and factors are not exhaustive. The bottom line is that reliability could be very, very challenging if we're not careful. Everyone needs to keep their eyes on this issue. I'm well aware, and I think we're all aware, of the comments that PJM and other RTOs have filed into the record, and how they express their concerns about reliability as it relates to this rule. And I think we need to take those concerns very seriously. To me, maintaining reliability is job number one. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughtful answer, Chairman. Commissioner.
Thank you. So mine is similar to Jehmal, but a little different. I think the question is, when would that signal come? And that makes all the difference in the world. Are you going to identify that, immediately upon the rule being finalized? At what point are those units identified and by whom? Because as a state regulator, I feel like we're looking at these things now and making decisions for the units that, could be running for 10, 15 years or replacements for them today. So having this layer of uncertainty on top of that for all of the choices for replacing dispatchable units right now, which the choices are pretty limited, it just creates a huge question mark. And I think, that I feel like the reliability must run is a little bit of a, this is how we're going to take care of it. We're just going to say we're going to have, reliability. This one gets to stay, and so nobody should worry about reliability. And I feel like it's just not that simple.
You raise fair points. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Fedorchak just made most of my points. But I would just add that we look at system reliability, and the preamble to the regs, as I believe Ms. Bloodworth said, refer to a reliability event. I don't know what a reliability event is because we want a reliable system. So the mechanics of a reliability exemption, I think, as Commissioner Fedorchak said, are sort of a concern to me. How would that work? Would the Wyoming DEQ ask us before they close something at the Public Service Commission? It's just that it would really have to be fleshed out to be workable. And again, we look at system reliability, not so much on a case-by-case basis.
So from a Colorado perspective, I think we really are not worried about reliability impacts from the rule. As I described, given the nature of the energy transition in Colorado, we do not see a significant impact from the rule on operation of generating units in Colorado. I can't speak on behalf of other states and certainly recognize that we are in a favorable position from a resource perspective as one of a relatively small number of states with access to both good solar and good wind resources without needing long-distance transmission to access those. With that said, I do believe that one of the most important elements of assuring reliability as the rule moves forward really is around the flexibility that is granted to states as they develop their plans. I think it is clearly easier to both minimize costs and maintain reliability when this is managed at the system level to achieve the same level of emissions reductions rather than with strict plant-by-plant requirements, and that the EPA should maximize the ability of states to manage at that system level.
Just a quick follow-up. If I recall from your testimony, you actually think that you can exceed the deadlines put forth in the proposed rule. And I'm just want to make sure that, just clarify for me, how are you doing this? So the transition that we're on right now, we were a very coal-heavy state. We had about 68% of our electricity coming from coal in 2010. We're now down at about 36%. Essentially, all of that replacement has been from renewables. So about 40% now comes from wind and solar. Under our currently adopted resource plan for our largest utility, Xcel Energy, will be at about 80% renewable by 2028. And we're simply continuing along that trajectory where the availability of low-cost wind and solar resources is allowing us to retire high-cost legacy coal assets and essentially make the transition at very low cost to customers. As we look out into the 2030s, we anticipate simply continuing that trajectory with larger additions of storage, primarily 4 and 8 hour batteries, although we think that the one somewhat speculative technology in there that is not as mature as 100-hour batteries. We're very excited about the potential of things like the iron air batteries that we will be testing in the Pueblo area. But basically, it doesn't require technologies that we don't already understand how to operate and don't have a pretty clear understanding of their costs. The biggest issues that we see really are around the ability to deploy those renewable resources quickly enough, where we face not really federal challenges, but challenges involving local permitting and siting, and that's a very active area of work in the state, is addressing those local permitting challenges. Thank you. Thank you all. I'm over time, but I just really appreciate you coming and weighing in on this very important discussion. Commissioner Danley.
So going back again to the question I'd asked a couple times before, the assumptions for the EPA rule, and the one that I mentioned in the past was that one of the assumptions built in was that the EPA could rely upon the good offices of the state PUCs and the markets to have orderly retirements. And I'm just wondering how likely you think, if the plan is implemented, that the retirements are going to be orderly based on the authorities that you wield and the consequences of the rule. First to Commissioner Fedorchak.
Thank you, Commissioner Danley. I was hoping you'd ask about retirements. So I listened to Jennifer Curran from MISO talk about this morning, and I understand the predicament they're in, because MISO sees what's going on. They see the retirement trajectory outpacing the new resources. And the most they can do is say, this is a problem, we need more dispatchable resources. But the states and MISO have their own integrated resource planning and hold very dearly to their planning prerogatives. And so what I feel like needs to happen to correct this transition and create an orderly, more orderly retirement trajectory is, MISO, FERC, none of you, you're all going to run up into something if you try to tell states you can't retire that. That's going to be a problem. So, but MISO and grid operators, they can require that the utilities in their zones bring certain resources to the table. They have those abilities. And so I think it needs to go to the interconnection process where you're bringing on or taking off resources. We need to start requiring that the resources that come on bring the attributes, they all have to have the same attributes or similar attributes or a package of attributes. I think if we could go back in time and understand at scale what happens when you bring on large numbers of renewables, you would do that 15 years ago, but we didn't know. We didn't know with the impact of 30%, 40%, 50% penetration, what that was going to have. We didn't know how much these existing baseload resources were doing. We didn't know what they were bringing to the grid. Well, somebody did, but not probably the market analysts. So I think that's where we need the correction in order to get the retirements at pace. But you heard Jennifer talk about this attributes initiative. They've been working on that for 5 years. Mm-hmm. Just identifying what the attributes are. Then you've got to quantify them. Then you have to identify, what numbers you need, when, and it's exceedingly complicated. So I think what you guys are doing, looking at the queue and what MISO could do with the queue requiring resources to interconnect with certain attributes is maybe the simplest way. North Dakota has looked at that, firming kind of resources. But in our state, it didn't make any sense because we have a lot of baseload resources already. And we are an export state, so we're producing way more than we need. We couldn't address this issue just on a state level, but on a region-wide level, it really makes sense, and I think is the key to the retirement piece.
Chairman, do you have anything to add on this?
Well, in Wyoming, we're not in an RTO or anywhere close to ever being in an RTO. So we have pretty strong state authority over retirements. The challenge is similar to North Dakota, of course, is that.
And of course, I am primarily making these comments about RTOs, but you
right.
Go with the panel members you have, and so,
right, so
I'm asking you what you think about the state powers.
So we've put statutes in place that give us quite a bit of authority over retirements, and so we'll at least have something to say when one is proposed. The challenge, again, getting back to one of my big themes across the West, is you have competing state policies. So Oregon and Washington, where a lot of our power goes, in California, they have mandates to exit coal in varying timeframes. So that's just the challenge we face. But I can't answer your RTO questions.
Right.
And I hope never to be able to answer your RTO questions.
Jehmal, or excuse me, Judge Hudson. This is because he was at FERC for so long.
Not a problem.
Apologies for that. It
Not
should
a
be more
problem.
formal.
Well, Commissioner Danley, what I'll just say quickly in the interest of time is that I think entities need the authority that's availed to themselves to take action if there are reliability challenges as we try to implement this rule. I know that, of course, it would be helpful for more coordination between federal agencies and stakeholders to meet and speak more frequently, and also just making sure we're monitoring the progress as far as states implementing the rule. But overall, I think that anything that can help as far as giving the entities the authority they need to address the reliability challenges would be extremely helpful.
So I only have one other question, and this is just to inform me generally. You're talking before about other people's wagons. I don't deal with the state-level air offices. Just in broad strokes, how closely do the state and local air offices deal with the state PUCs? I'm just curious how close the coordination is on this stuff.
I think it varies, but it's usually pretty close.
Okay.
We have, not just because I like the NARUC people, we have a really close relationship with NARUC. In the run-up to the EPA's issuance of proposal and development of comments, we spoke extensively with EEI. We really tried to unpack this very closely with them. We've talked to the RTOs. We've tried to talk to the vulnerable communities and green groups as well. But really, I think in particular, I don't mean to be throwing a special, loaf of bread at EEI, but they really went out of their way to help us understand what their concerns were, hear what our concerns were, and that was all prior to the development of comments that went into EPA, which is unusual, which I think reflects how seriously both they and we are taking this.
Okay, I appreciate it. Sir, did you have something to add on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that in my experience, there is very close coordination. And in the Colorado context, we have statutory requirement that our air regulators have to review the electric resource plans that are adopted by our Public Utilities Commission and provide comment into them. And there's a very strong working relationship between the PUC regulatory process and a variety of area regulatory processes that impact power generation.
How about the reverse? If the Colorado Air Office is going to promulgate something, do they have to consult mandatorily with the PUC to see what the consequences are going to be?
There is not the same statutory requirement, but in practice, it always happens.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Commissioner Clements?
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. For perhaps the first time in our collective terms, Commissioner Danley stole my question. Yeah. And maybe I'm just tired, but I don't have any other questions right now. So I guess I'll ask it one question generically, and I was going to start with you, Miles, since you have a more whole perspective over more states. How do the states go about this? Give us more color about, you've asked for these, I'm impressed there was consensus comments. You asked for these flexibilities. What happens next when this rule gets handed down?
It depends on what's in the rule. This question that Commissioner Danley's asking about, will the retirements be orderly? Ho Chi Minh was asked whether the American Revolution was a success, and he said it's too soon to tell. I think it depends on what comes out of the rule. It depends on how things, what signals are sent through the rule to the states about the flexibilities that they are given in developing their plans. I think one big piece of the orderly question is that y'all have agency here, that there's going to be an opportunity when states are developing state plans in response to EPA's final rule. To provide them with reliability modeling, to provide them with support, to provide them with insight. Whether there are flexibilities like mass and rate-based trading and averaging, enforcement discretion, clear signals about rule-off. I don't think the states are going to be super adventurous about proposing things to EPA that they don't have signals from EPA are going to be acceptable. They're not going to just throw spaghetti against the wall. Yeah. But if they have those things, and if organizations like the RTOs, like NERC and FERC, can supply them with clear signals about the prudential way to effect retirement, then I think there's a good shot that we're going to see something much more orderly than a worst case scenario.
Great, thank you. I'm good.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Christie?
Miles, I think it was Zhou Enlai, and I think it was the French Revolution.
Commissioner Christie, of course you're right. As soon as you said it, you're right. I always defer to Commissioner Christie.
Okay. Miles was the go-to guy in NARUC, and I want to tell you what the go-to was for, but miss not having you there. But anyway, you're doing great, Miles. Still the same guy, but get the history right. But, at this stage of the day, and I know most everybody here, it's hard to get anything tough questioning. But I just want to note a few things about our great statements from everybody. Great statements from everybody. And Julie, I want to note that Julie Fedorchak is going to be president of NARUC in a few days. So I want to recognize that incoming president.
Speaking today on behalf of myself, however.
What?
Speaking today on behalf of myself, however.
Right, of course. Exactly. It's hard to speak on behalf of NARUC. It's like today is a day. We all agree on that. Some. Okay. And no Mary from going out west until this Krebsy YRAB, so, and hope you get better. Jehmal, Jehmal came to the Virginia Commission about the same time I went to the FERC. It was like a baseball trade. And I always tell people that, the Virginia Commission came out way ahead on that one, for sure. But I just want to say, your opening statement was great, and I'm just proud as a former Virginia Commissioner that you ended your statement by emphasizing how important it is in the Virginia Commission that we put consumers first. And I was really pleased to hear that. And you drunk the Kool-Aid, man, and that's great, because that is the culture of our commission. Put the consumers first, and I was just so glad to hear you say that. Substantively, I want to follow up though, and the chairman asked you about the the reliability exception or whatever term you want to use, and you mentioned our law in Virginia, with the Clean Energy Act, which does have what I call the safety valve. And if you just tell more about that, I mean, as I understand the law, if there's a reliability unit that you think as a commission is just simply essential to reliability, the utility comes to you and says, this unit really, we can't shut it down. Can you tell more about, because I think it's a really good feature of the law. I call it a safety valve, but from a reliability standpoint, it seems to me it gives you, the commission, the Virginia Commission, a way to basically save the day.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. And maybe the best way I can probably explain it is just maybe more of our process and procedures as a utility would come and actually make such a filing. And I think what will happen is that if a utility has some concerns about reliability, again, they would petition the commission to file an application before us. And what we would do at the commission, without getting more into the substantive aspects of it, is that we will hold a proceeding. All parties will come in, and what we do is that we look at the pursuant applicable laws, as well as the finding of fact, and make a decision based on the support of evidence in the record. But to your point, the reliability safety valve, which is, I know, something that was actually discussed in the first Clean Power Plan as well, about actually addressing it, I think is a very important tool that's needed and should be considered as we actually move forward with this rule as well. But to your point, in Virginia, we actually have that similar mechanism that can be used if a utility comes before us to make that claim.
Right, and and when I look at that and I think about the Virginia law, and I think that's a really good provision. And I know, Julie, you mentioned it's tough to extrapolate that to a broader scale. When would you do it? I know, but I think that one thing that could be done. I'm going to mention this to Mr. Goffin when we talk again. Is you could take that the principle embodied in the Virginia law, and you could let the system operators, both RTO and non-RTO, potentially name a unit as, just like they name an RMR unit, as a reliability unit, and that would trigger an exemption from the regulation on the same principle that the Virginia law says. If it's essential to reliability, it's exempt from the Virginia standards. So it's a possibility. Whether it's workable or not, I think when you look at solutions, to me that's an idea. Is use that principle in the Virginia law for exemption from the EPA reg if it's a reliability unit that the system operator says, we got to have it. We got to have it. Anyone want to react?
So, I think it's better to have it than not. And I think Emily from EI mentioned in the previous panel, the identification of, units that are needed for reliability. And so I support that, but the reality is a lot of these units aren't just looking at the greenhouse gas rules. They're looking at, ozone transfer rules. They're looking at the carbon residuals. They're looking at the good neighbor and the MATS rules. And so, when you look more broadly at what the grid operators are saying, who are looking at the system as a whole and seeing the threats on all of these units kind of layering up, picking one or two to keep, how do you make sense of it in the long term? How do you have this orderly path when you have so many threats coming from so many different ways and people making decisions based on those things that have economic interests? They don't, we've got a unit in North Dakota that it's a merchant unit, and they are 1,050 megawatts. They have been running at max gen the last 2 serious winter storms. MISO has rated them with a really high capacity rating because they're so valuable. They are seriously threatened with CCR and MATS. Mm-hmm. And so they're looking at, okay, what are those investments? And then what's going to happen after that? If I'm going to have, and they're looking at carbon capture and storage. They intend to do that, but can they do it by 2030 to meet the 2040 or whatever? I don't know if I've got all the deadlines right, but you get my point. This is a merchant plant. How do they recover those
I don't think you
costs?
can do it other than with rate-based plants. Because then the financing
yeah,
is
but then you've got
rate-based.
then you've got commissioners saying, well, we don't want that. That's too expensive. We're gonna, pick a different way. And then you've got okay, well, we'll go with gas. Except for gas is subject to these rules too. So we're gonna put a brand new gas unit in and run it at 20% capacity factor by 2030 or 2032. These are there are real economic considerations that come to the fold here more than anything else that we have to address so that the system is both reliable and affordable, and you have people who want to invest in it.
If I could, I think that there's a great thing that I'm seeing today, which is that this conversation hasn't fallen into a trap. The trap is that we can either have reliability or we can have emission reductions. And, so one side is saying we got to have reliability and the other side saying we got to decarbonize. And what I've seen today is that we haven't fallen into that trap, that we want our cake and to eat it too. We want them both. Anyone who thinks you can't have both doesn't know how to operate a cake, right? So we can have both of those things, I think. But that's why the flexibilities are so important. And how this parlays back to your idea of a reliability exemption is, if that's really the last stand, then what I heard from NACA agencies was, we're not closed to it. But that by using things like averaging and trading, Commissioner Danley's thinking of ways to have cake and eat it too. Two cakes. Two cakes. You use trading, you use averaging, you use all the other flexibility mechanisms at your disposal so that maintaining your units that are higher emitting, that are essential to reliability or important to reliability, that you're getting the emission reductions somewhere else, that you're not compromising the overall benefit of the emission reduction pathway. And I think that's really what we want, is we want to get the emission reductions and we want the reliability. And so we got to continue to have conversations about how do we use those flexibilities to preserve those things as best we can. And then ultimately, if we fall back and we've run out of options for preserving those things, then I think, then it's legitimate to have a very strong conversation about, the emission reductions need to be put on the table, or something else needs to happen.
I do want the cake at a price I can afford, and I think that's what most people want.
Could I make a follow-up comment / question to Miles? So I like this approach because I'm, a cooperative person, but I wonder, who are the lucky people that get to pay for the unit that costs so much it never runs? Where does that get paid for?
I think that is, I'm so happy I never want to say this, but I will say I'm so happy that that is not my problem. No, genuinely. When Will was talking about the Colorado experience, having 8,000 megawatts of units that are running 80 or 100 hours and paying their mortgage on those units when they're selling 80 or 800 kilowatt hour windows, you know, like they're selling for those windows. Is that enough? And the smartest people in the world, economic regulators, are hereby charged with figuring that out. That's not a me problem. And that's an inevitability of the energy transition, regardless of what's happening with this EPA rule. I recognize that's a real question, and you guys got your work cut out for you.
May I follow up on that?
Since I used you as an example, please.
So first, I very much agree with the perspective that the first sort of line of defense and reliability is maximizing that flexibility for states to have flexibility in adopting their plans that allow them to manage it at the system level rather than the individual unit level. That's also, I think, where the economics work. Again, to use the Colorado experience, we can afford to maintain a bunch of gas units that will only be operating a little bit of the time because we are replacing fuel costs, essentially eliminating fuel costs and adding a lot of wind and solar that are in the 2 to 3 cent a kilowatt hour range and a little bit of storage that's more expensive. And when you look at it at the system level, it's cheaper than simply continuing to operate the system the way we do it today.
Let me ask you, Mr. Toor. I assume when you say it's cheaper, you're talking about to the retail consumer, because I've got to believe that before you get investors in a 20% capacity unit, it's going to be rate-based, and therefore the owners are going to be guaranteed cost recovery, right, plus an ROE.
That is certainly the case.
Right, have to be, because why would anybody invest in a plant that runs 20% of the time, right? So your consumers are going to pay the cost whether it runs or not, because that's the way it works in rate base.
That's correct, but the total cost that they will be paying includes the cost of the entire system, not only of those units.
And like Miles said, you're not the utility regulator, so you don't have to put that into rates.
That is luckily the case.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to note, Commissioner Clements said it was remarkable that Commissioner Danley stole her question. What's going to be remarkable is when he steals your answer. Okay.
All right. Oh, it's not my job. Eric.
Sure. Any other questions from the commission? No.
I think we've
Okay.
reached the end.
Exactly. All of my questions have been stolen, so I will turn to others on staff. Excellent. All right. With that, that's the end of this panel. Mr. Chairman, turn to you for any closing remarks.
And I'll just simply thank everybody again. I want to thank staff, the Office of Electric Reliability. We have called on you every single month this year. You have stepped up every month. You're batting 1,000. We appreciate you. We value you. And with that, we are adjourned.
All right. I know.